So we have Dr. Priyanka Verma with us. She is a clinical psychologist. She is a counselor, a psychotherapist. She has experience of 10 years. She has been trained in London and in Mumbai. She consults at the Holy Family Hospital and Global Hospital. Her area of interest is working with young adults and how to navigate them, during their changing emotions, along with the society. She is also the founder of ThoughtCo, which is a mental health awareness organization uh, that she has founded it. And we will be discussing about how to deal with heartbreak and how to cope up with jealousy and guilt. So, am I audible? I'm trying. Mom's trying to connect with me. I hope I'm audible. Can somebody tell me if I'm audible enough? Yeah, she'll be there to join us in a minute. I'll check again. Yes, thank you. Hi, sister. Okay. So, ma'am will be there in a minute. Yeah, hi, ma'am.
Hi. It took me a while to connect, but
No
I'm here.
problem, no problem.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming and joining us.
No, it was my pleasure. I'm quite happy to be here with all of you
Okay.
all. I can see you guys got a very good turnout. That's pretty cool.
Okay. So, today we will be talking about heartbreaks and how to cope up with jealousy and guilt. So before that, there's something that was very heartbreaking that happened today. So most of us might have seen in the news that actor Sushant Singh Rajput had committed suicide, and it's very heartbreaking because he was truly an inspiration for most of us, and it's just that we just hope his soul rests in peace. So, ma'am,
Hmm.
as a mental health professional, do you think it? What would you like to say? Not people are not even coming out and expressing they are mentally unwell. So, what would you like to comment on that?
So, when we think about suicide,
Mm-hmm.
um, to begin with, I think what happened today when we read the news, I read it this afternoon, and um, it was sad. It was disheartening because a lot of us look up to him as a role model. He looked like his life was put together. He looked like he had it all. He looked like he was sorted.
Yes.
And when you see somebody who we perceive as being sorted, struggling, and then taking a measure or a step like this, it makes us question our own reality and where we are today in life. So, here's what I'm trying to say is that when somebody is struggling, it's never apparent. They don't come and say, "Hey, I'm struggling and I need your help." That's actually one of the last things they're going to do. On the
Yes.
contrary, it has been widely researched and said that people who are depressed or people who intend to take their life often are the ones you see smiling the most. They will hide their sadness, they will hide their fear behind a smile, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm okay. You know, I'm fine. I've got my life put together. See how things are." But despite that, there are some telltale signs where you know that somebody is intending to take their life away, or if they're struggling. One of which is that they try to wrap up matters, or they try to finish unfinished work or businesses with that. Two is that there's a change in behavior. There'll be a sudden change in behavior. Either they'll suddenly appear extremely happy or extremely sad. So notice for that. The other signs I think we should draw attention to is disturbed sleep. If you notice that somebody who's living with you, their sleep is disturbed. Now, by that I mean either they're sleeping too much or too little, either ends of the spectrum, or and changes in their appetite, eating too much or too little. Now, if we are living with somebody, we can notice these two signs because these two signs are indicative of good functioning, of adjustable functioning. And if this persists for more than 3-4 days, it is our duty to go and ask the person, "How are things? Is everything okay?" And I know their immediate reaction is going to be, "Hey, everything's fine. I'm perfectly okay." But you need to persist with regular checkups with them, you know. And if you
Okay.
want to help out and reach out to them, simple things that asking them, "Is everything okay?" is important. But I would also say take them for walks. The importance of stepping out of your house. I know the pandemic is right now, but most of us live in societies which are now permitting us to take walks in that building. Take them for walks, because the importance of physical exercise is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. 20 minutes of physical exercise, even if it's a stroll in the garden, is important. If you
Okay,
live
ma'am.
with them, simple things like playing music and getting them to dance, is very important. I read this quote once where somebody said that it's virtually impossible to dance and cry at the same time. And just the physical activity, that in doing it with somebody, is like an injection of hope and happiness, which is one way of reaching out to them. See, if somebody is deciding or contemplating the concept of taking their life, they think their problems are beyond repair. Perhaps they think that this is it, I've lived my life, I can't do anything about this, right? So at that point, we can just reach out to them and say, hey, you know what, there is hope, and there's hope with us. There's hope with us being friends. There's hope with us taking care of each other at the same time. That's one of the ways I think we can reach out to somebody within our circle who we think is not in a good place. I also feel as humans, most of us think that, okay, if somebody's going through a problem, let them just handle it themselves. I won't get involved in that situation or that mess. I think that's the time you actually get involved in it. You go and say, hey, how are you? How are things going? Do you need help with something? Just asking those questions and persisting with it is very important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this. Okay, we'll start with the main session. So, what exactly is a heartbreak, and what are the main causes of heartbreaks?
Okay, so
generally more of a, when we say heartbreak, it just directs us into a relationship issue. What other things are equally, heartbreaking?
So when I read your topic for today, I was actually quite amused with it, because I've been discussing this a lot of other therapists, and I think one of the main reasons why people actually enter therapy is because of a heartbreak. They experience internal breakdown, and that which they are unable to cope with, that they say, hey, I need help. Can you help me with it? So if I had to say what a heartbreak is, you're right. It's just not emotional, just not a breakup within a relationship with a loved one. It is a significant amount of emotional distress which we experience, which actually causes physical symptoms. Like, it actually causes a pain in your heart. It causes a feeling of hollowness from within. And that could be losing a job you really wanted, or not getting the grades you wanted even after you worked so hard for it. It could even be that you tried very hard to compete for a particular race, but you fell short by 2 seconds. Anything that you've invested emotionally and physically in, and that doesn't work out the way you planned, that's what a heartbreak is.
So I would like to ask you, so how do we deal with it when life doesn't go as the way we planned it? How to deal with it? Any tips?
So heads up, nothing goes according to plan. That's a part of our reality, and we all need to understand that. And I guess a lot of the people tuning in are significantly younger. They're in their teens, early 20s, or maybe older. But you need to realize that everything does not go to plan, and very often your plan A will not work out. And that's why you need to have a plan B. Just that awareness and that acceptance that if things haven't worked out the way I wanted to, it's okay. That mind shift, that change, saying, I need to roll with the punches. I need to deal with situations as per when they come. That change in perception is the best way to cope with heartbreak, so as to say. And I think that this concept is rooted in mindfulness. Now, all of us hear about mindfulness in terms of mindful eating, mindful meditation, mindful studying. But actually, the way I view mindfulness is, it's like a lifestyle. It's a way we approach every activity of the day. It doesn't come from over planning or under planning. It comes from being in that moment and choosing the best option in that moment. And if I'm able to do that constantly with everything that comes my way, I will be able to handle heartbreak far more effectively. So, for example, if I have this job and I work really hard in the job, and because of some financial issues with the company, like right now in COVID-19, they've asked me to leave. And that's a real heartbreak. I'm really, really heartbroken. I'm really disappointed what's happening. And then if I'm truly mindful, I'll realize, okay, I'm looking at the situation. I see what's happening. What's my next best option? To upskill and find a new job. So if I'm able to look at it mindfully, at this is my present situation, how do I deal with the best way? You're able to adjust with different situations far more effectively.
Okay. So what are the signs and symptoms? Like, do we have physical pain and panic attacks, or we do at times, they say that, and how to address them?
So a heartbreak actually causes physical symptoms, and there's the mind body connection, which is very it's very true, and it's very tied together. Your body is the first sign to tell you that something is happening to you emotionally. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for people, they may either express some sense of restlessness, a pain in their chest, shortness in breath, difficulty breathing, lack of clarity with thought, frequent sighing. They may even experience things like diarrhea or constipation. These are physical symptoms which are also under the umbrella of anxiety and depression, but they are also indicative that something is going astray emotionally and likely to be,
Okay.
in this situation, a heartbreak.
Okay. So how can we help a friend who is going through a heartbreak?
So now, if a friend now that looking at situations wherein your friend has lost a job or your
Mm-hmm.
friend has not passed or cleared the exams they wanted to, and these are very apparent situations. It's out there in the open. Everybody can read out to them. I think one thing is not to rub it in. Um,
Okay.
and I'm not saying people are vindictive and will call up the person and say, "Oh, this is what happened to you and this is what is." No, I'm saying that when you pick up the phone and call up to them, you can address the elephant in the room saying, "Hey, it sucks that this
Mm-hmm.
happened, but there's a silver lining to the situation. I will help you find that silver lining in it." You know,
Okay.
that's one of the best things to do with a friend who's going through some amount of distress, by showing them that there is light at the end of the tunnel, there is hope, and I'm there to support you with it. And
Okay.
sometimes picking up the
Mm-hmm.
phone and just being in silence with your friend is the best kind of comfort, because they don't want to talk, they just want to know you're there for them. And being aware of what your friend needs in that moment is how you be there for your friend.
Okay.
Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
silence and just being there physically or now over the phone can heal so much.
Okay. So how to, overcome and not given, to the pressure? Like some people take drugs and some people even go into suicidal thoughts. And what about that? What can we do about that?
So my standard belief is that if I'm sad, don't drink. If I'm sad, don't do drugs, because the high you get is not going to be a good high. You're going to have a very, very bad trip. And if you want to experiment or drink or whatever it may be, do it when you're already in a good place, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't condition it otherwise. Um, and if you know that, and you know the dangers of doing or of a bad trip, or how your body is going to be so affected that instead of actually feeling better, you're just going to go further low, you're
Mm-hmm.
more likely not to do it with it. But
Okay.
interestingly, I want to tell you one thing over here. I don't know if one of the next questions about
Mm-hmm.
drug addicts and a heartbreak. I was reading up a bit before you and I got on a call, and they say a heartbreak is a lot like a withdrawal from a drug. We are more likely to experience the same kind of physical symptoms: hand shivering, pain in the chest, unable to think clearly, difficulty breathing,
Mm-hmm.
lack of clarity, similar to what's going when you're withdrawing from a substance.
Okay.
And an
So
interesting
maybe
part,
that is.
pardon?
No, no, finish. No,
Uh,
no,
and
please finish.
and the interesting part is that what they realized is that people who
Mm-hmm.
are frequent drug users, right,
Mm-hmm.
when they OD on a substance and die from it, it's research says that it's largely because they've done that same substance in a new place. The study was done in 2012, and what they found out that opium users who usually take the same amount of opium, right, and if they've taken the same amount of opium in a new place, they're more likely to OD and pass away because of it.
Okay.
Reason is because our body and our mind, if I'm taking a substance at a particular place at a particular time, my mind is conditioned to know, okay, these are the chemicals I need to release so as to, regulate the heartbeat, regulate the breathing patterns, and so on and so forth. But if I do it in a new place or at a new time, my mind is not prepared for it. So they're likely to go into this shock mode and then OD. And that is similar to what happens in a heartbreak, because we experience those severe withdrawals, right? So our mind and our body, if you're going to continue being in the same routine or the same situation because of a heartbreak, our body will find it difficult to cope with the situation, because our mind and body almost expects to wake up in the morning and go to work and get ready to go to work, or our mind and body almost expects that now at 5 o'clock, with my evening coffee, I'm going to pick up the phone and talk to my girlfriend or my boyfriend. And because that routine has, our mind has created a routine, almost expects these things to come, the withdrawal symptoms we experience are far more significant. And they compared the two together. So one of the suggestions, if you're going through a heartbreak, romantic or otherwise, you need to change your routine. You need to completely spruce it up, make it, do it back and forward, because you will have to it has to be unlearned, the routine. It has to be reconditioned. Yeah.
Okay. So I was actually going to that question. So fine, I'll ask you about how to constructively, look at something, like how to give it a positive outlook. It might be easy for us to, go to a friend and tell them like there is a silver lining, but how does the person who's affected, accept it? Anything you would like to add?
Okay, so one of the techniques I use with most of my clients is a journaling activity, which I recommend we all do it every day. It's something I try to practice myself. It's called the rose, thorn, and bud technique, wherein every day you identify one thing that was good about your day. If it was more than one, write it. Two is you identify one thing that was challenging about your day. And here's the thing, right? A lot of us will live in this illusion of only positive or positivity, or this bubble of positivity. And I'm not for it, because the reality is that we all have challenges in life, and it's only through challenges we learn and grow. So identify the challenging part of your day. And if you didn't have a challenging part of your day, that means you did not do anything in that day, which is a clear indicator that you're stagnating. You need to keep evolving and growing, which is very crucial for us to grow in life, to be better people, to learn more, do more, be better. Okay, so the rose, the thorn, and the bud technique, which I think is extremely important, is one thing you're looking forward to tomorrow. And when people are struggling with a heartbreak or with things like depression, knowing that there's something I'm looking forward to tomorrow kind of creates a thread of hope, which we weave from one day to the other, something I look forward to get up in the next day in the morning and do. Even if it's a cup of coffee, which I have by my window every morning, that's something you look forward to do, and it's important for us to identify it. So this technique, rose, thorn, and bud technique, it's rooted in reality. It's not clouded with positivity, because I don't want to create false illusions for people. I don't want them to live their life in bubbles that reality does not exist out there. But I also want you to express gratitude with your life and create a sense of hope with your life. So rose, thorn, bud technique, just doing it for 5 minutes before you go to sleep every night is one of the best things you can do for yourself. Apart from
okay, so that is very interesting, and I think I will follow it at least from today. So, okay. Okay, so about relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships, so how to move on? Like, there are certain facts and myths. So, what would you like to say on that?
Sometimes some relationships which last for 6 months can be as emotionally intense as some people who've been in marriages for 10 years. And there are some people who've been in marriages for 10 years who can have such emotionally depleted relationships that could look like you just dated somebody for 2 weeks. So, I don't think it's fair to tell people that, but you only dated them for like 6 months. Why are you so upset? There is no formula for how long you spend grieving over a person.
Okay.
And I'm going to be very morbid with this example I'm going to give you, but it's something I learned from one of my psychologists who I interned under way back in my early days. And she told me that, when somebody passes away, we allow ourselves 4 days to mourn. Hence, we have a chauta. This person is alive. Why are you allowing yourself more than 4 days to mourn the loss of the relationship? So what I'm trying to say is that give yourself time to cry. Give yourself time to mope and cry for those 2, 3, 4 days. Take your time out and cry, and don't tell anybody not to cry for it, because you have to mourn the relationship, the loss of the relationship. But come the 5th day, you have to then bring about changes in your routine. You have to bring about changes in your life. And if we are going to live in the illusion that I will continue the same routine and I will cope so well, you're lying to yourself. It doesn't work that way. Initially, for the initial period post the breakup of the relationship, research recommends you block each other. You stop stalking each other online. You stop going out and checking when they were on WhatsApp, the last check, the last scene. Stop doing all of that. Actually block the person. Because what happens is that we don't allow ourselves to look at the world around us and create new memories and new perspectives to things, So digital detox is very important. Something I've noticed all of us go through is that whenever the same places now create emotions of sadness. So, for example, I may take the same route from home to home every day, and I would never feel an emotion while I was dating that person. But now I will feel sadness when I pass the bus stop because I was on the phone when I spoke to the person at this bus stop, and this is what we spoke about. Our mind creates a network of
Okay.
memories. What I need you to do is actually go to the same places which you went with your loved one and start creating new memories there. Go with your funniest, most hilarious friend to that place and make it a point to focus on the conversation and create a new memory with that place. Go step by step by step. And the third part, if finances allow us and if the lockdown permits us, you need to go and travel. And don't go for a relaxing holiday where you sit back by the beach and chill. You need to go on a really packed holiday where you're doing so many things in a day. 20 things in a day if you can, because it tricks our mind into thinking a lot of time has passed. So, if you can do these things during your breakup, it's great. I mean, it's one of the quickest ways to get over it.
Okay. So how do we deal with the pain? Like now you've spoken about moving on, but the pain...
The physical pain are you talking about? Or the emotional pain?
No, like you said, the memory kicks in. Let's say after 4 days and the 5th day, I go back to my own routine. Let's say after a month or something, you suddenly feel something is different and you feel a different pain. Is there anything that you can do about that?
Acknowledge the pain.
Okay.
I think the first step is you have to acknowledge the pain and acknowledge the memory in the pain. And then you actually have to have a conversation with yourself saying, I realize that you are feeling sad because this reminds you of that person and you miss that person. But right now, you all have decided to live your own individual lives and you've decided to move on. So don't dismiss the pain. If you're feeling an emotion right there, acknowledge it in the moment and say, I feel the pain. I realize where it's coming from, but I also realize that I need to take care of myself first. So engaging in that anymore doesn't help me. Then choose an activity which is disengaging from that thought, because any emotional pain you're experiencing is always connected to a thought you have about the situation. Thoughts, emotions, and the body all connected. But dismissing it will not help. Acknowledge it. Feel the pain for those 2-3 minutes because that emotional pain is real. But then also make it a point to say that that's a part of my past. It has no place in my present. Almost be like your internal therapist and say, now I need to move on to this. Re-ground yourself to the present. Yeah.
Okay. So about expectations, like how do we control our anger? Let's say there is this job I want very badly and someone else gets it. I get enraged. So how do I control with that?
Okay, so I mean, anger seems to be a topic right now. A lot of us are talking about in different contexts. Right from the chaos and riots all across the country in terms of lives matter. So where I come from, I think anger is an important emotion. I'm not of the belief that anger is a bad emotion. I don't think anger is a negative emotion. I believe it's an essential and important emotion because anger can drive change. So the way I view anger is like it's a wild horse. If I take that wild horse and I tame it and I train it, it can move me from point A to point B. It can drive a positive change too. Okay. But now we have to look at anger in a realization that anger is an emotion that never exists in isolation. It's always a comorbid emotion. It always exists with another emotion. So when you recognize that I'm angry, I will come to how you recognize angry in a bit. But if you recognize you're angry, ask yourself, what exists with that anger? What are the other emotions that are hiding behind that anger in my life? And if you want, take a pen and paper down and list out all the other emotions you're feeling with it. And address those other emotions. So very often what I realize is that when people feel angry, they feel that their voice has not been heard. They feel undervalued. They feel worthless. They feel they've been unfairly treated. Address that feelings of worthlessness. And that's one of the most healthy ways to address anger. Always exists in a comorbid way, never exists in isolation. And if you notice somebody else is angry with you, understand they're not angry with you without any reason. There's a comorbid emotion also with them, which is causing them to be angry with you. Now, a simple way to recognize if you're angry is your body. Either your teeth will start grinding, your fist will clench, or you will lose clarity of thought. You will start experiencing this churn in your stomach, or you'll start restless pacing. Now, if you are connected with your body and you're able to identify your body, when the minute you start noticing these signs and symptoms, step away. Step away from the situation and then do that exercise I spoke about listing the 20 things that exist behind anger and address those things before you go to the conversation with that person. I do not believe anger should be ignored. If something is really troubling me, I need to voice it out in that conversation. I'm very pro being heard. But how I'm heard matters. If I'm going to come and scream and shout and my tone and voice is very loud, nobody's going to listen to me. I can't drive the change. My feeling of pain and worthlessness, nobody's going to hear. But if I've identified the emotions behind it and I then bring it to the conversation, then people will listen to me. And very often anger is a result of people not being heard. People feel that my voice was not heard, my opinion was not heard, and that enrages them. The sense of I being heard in the conversation. And if I can find healthy ways to be heard, it will be fine. Yeah.
Okay. It was a very new perspective on anger. Like, not everyone of us have heard that anger is a good thing. So it was really nice to, hear that. Also, how do we deal with, feeling inferior?
So, inferior is actually a very deeply rooted concept. It comes from the feeling of worthlessness, I would say, or constantly comparing myself to others. It comes from a lot of negative self-talk. I would say that identify first, where am I feeling inferior? Am I feeling inferior in all areas of my life or just one particular area? Now I'm going to begin with that most of us tend to feel inferior either in our workplace or while we're studying with our peers. And ask yourself, why am I feeling inferior? And very often you'll understand you're feeling inferior because you're not viewing yourself as the I, you're viewing yourself as I in comparison to. It's either I in comparison to my friend or I in comparison to who I want to be. So we have these two selves, the real self and the ideal self. The ideal self is who we want to be and who we want the world to think we are. And the real self is who we are. And very often we try to project the ideal self on the world. And when we have when we have a difference in the two, we tend to feel more inferior because we realize, hey, this is not who I am, but I want to be this. And then we start a negative self-talk with it. What I would say is first, literally do an exercise where you list out the ideal self and list out the real self, okay? And then you look at the difference between the two. And then you map out a plan about how can I move from the real self to the ideal self, right? Literally follow these steps. And then once you've done that, you've created a plan, realistic, actionable plan for it. And you start working towards that. You then start getting comfortable with the real self, saying, okay, this is who I am. But I'm also a work in progress. I'm also working towards getting there. So we don't dismiss ourselves by saying, hey, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm good for nothing. You say, hey, you know what? I'm not where I want to be in life today, but I'm working for it. So that becomes an encouraging, positive self-talk. Where we're not looking at other people's plates, we're looking at just me, myself, and my journey. And that's one of the healthiest ways to deal with inferiority.
Okay. So also, how to overcome jealousy and, accept others' successes?
Say thank you and say congratulations. I think if you can bring yourself to say those two words, a lot of the jealousy and comparison goes away. And when they do it, when you're saying thank you and you're saying congratulations, just don't say the word. Say congratulations on getting this. And I'm so excited that you have got this. Just saying the thank you and congratulations will take away a lot of that internal jealousy you feel for somebody else. And above everything else, it helps you have a better working relationship with that person moving forward and doesn't create the boundaries which you are creating for yourself in that working relationship. But so jealousy is an emotion which comes in again from comparison. It comes again from saying that I'm not good enough or I want to have it all. A lot of people who probably are very good at what they're doing and they're very good at what they're doing. When somebody else gets an award or a trophy, they want it because they want to have it all. And at that point of time, say thank you, say congratulations, and then go back to all the successes you've had, all the achievements you've got in your life, and then be grateful for that. If I'm only going to be looking at somebody else's plate and not at my plate, I'm never going to go ahead in life. And that's one of the healthiest ways again to deal with jealousy is focus on my plate, what I have to do with my life on my plate, not what the other person's doing.
Okay. So, how to deal with guilt? Like people just blame themselves for everything that's happening around. So, what about that?
So guilt is actually a very futile emotion, the way I view it. I mean, I don't know how it serves anybody. I think what happens with guilt is that we beat ourselves up emotionally over and over and over again, and nothing in our life shifts for a positive change. Nothing does. So I would, for guilt, I would tell you what an experiment people did actually to understand why and how people justify guilt. Because when I talk about guilt with my clients, a lot of people tend to use guilt as saying, but if I do this, I'm encouraging myself to do better, so I don't make that mistake again. Because I'm reminding myself of the mistake I made in the past, so I don't make that mistake again. It's almost like a self-punishment way they use with guilt. So this experiment which they ran was that they had two groups of people. One who did really well on a task and one who did really poorly on a particular task. And in those two groups, they further divide them into two groups. Okay. So now group one, which did really well in the task, they divide them into two, group A and group B. Group A got positive feedback for it and group B got negative feedback for it. Right? Now in group two, again, those who all did very badly were divided again into two groups. So group C, which got positive feedback, and group D, which was got negative feedback. Okay? So I have a question for you. Which group do you think did better than they did previously in the second round of this task?
I think the positive feedback group would have done better. Or does it not?
A, B, C, or D? Which one?
I think A and C.
Okay, very good. Why do you think so?
Well, they say that if you kind of encourage someone, it just motivates them to do better. But doesn't it vary from person to person?
So surprisingly, it doesn't vary from person to person. If I motivate someone, I encourage someone, you're absolutely right. And I'm really glad to hear this because whenever I talk to my clients, they always give me the wrong answer. So it's really nice to know you've got it right, But group A and group C did better. But group C, the ones who did very poorly the first time around, did significantly better the second time around, because they received positive feedback. Now what happens, group B and group C actually did the worst because even though they were good in the task, they received negative feedback. Their performance dropped even further. So what happens is guilt is like negative feedback. We keep telling ourselves, you were wrong to do this. It was not good that you did it. You're really bad for doing it. And that creates a negative feedback loop in our head. Therefore, instead of thinking that this is making us walk a straight line or encouraging us, it's not. It's creating these walls and these boundaries where we're not encouraging ourselves or moving ahead in life. So you have to acknowledge, hey, you messed up and it was not cool for you to mess up. But to play it on loop, hence forming guilt, is futile. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't help us move forward. But instead, identify, okay, this is what you did wrong. But now how can you do better moving forward? And replay how you can do better moving forward, which is far more constructive than just having guilt accumulated.
Okay. So there's something called self-love. What exactly is it and how do you practice that?
Self-love is loving yourself. And how I love myself varies from person to person. A lot of people right now on Instagram and this whole thing during the pandemic was, oh, you have to put face pack and that's self-care. Oh, if I go for a walk every day, it's self-care. If I do yoga every day, it's self-care. That's not just it. Self-love is basically doing what gives you joy. It's doing what makes you happy by your definition of happiness. So if I have to define happiness, for me, happiness is a warm, gooey chocolate cake, and that feeling should be given to you in whatever activity you choose to do. So the way I love myself is when I treat myself with some chocolate dessert, that's me being kind to myself and that's me showing a victory to myself.
That makes two of us.
Yeah, that's good. But that's self-love. It's doing anything that gives you happiness. It's prioritizing your emotional and physical needs above somebody else's. And engaging in that every day is most important because that's the only way we can deal with things like resilience and avoiding burnout and dealing with cognitive self-flexibility. If we are constantly pumping ourselves up with nurturance for ourselves,
So, how is it not often confused with being self-centered? Like, let's say I put myself above others. So am I not being selfish?
You know, a lot of people think selfishness and self-love are the same thing, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Selfishness is when I'm mean to the other person. Selfishness is when I'm taking
Mm-hmm.
something
Okay.
away from you to hurt you. In
Mm-hmm.
self-love, I'm prioritizing my needs because I am also important. And more importantly, I am important, so I need to take care of myself. You know, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm not giving you. I am giving you. I'm still nurturing you, but I'm nurturing myself too and first. You know,
Okay.
that's the
Mm-hmm.
key definition. A lot of people have tainted the concept of self-love by thinking, you know, it means something mean and something evil. But
Mm-hmm.
listen, if for me to take care of you, I have to first take care of myself. You know
True.
that, and that example they've used widely about when we all are in airplanes and if it hits a turbulence, this oxygen mask
Mm-hmm.
come down. You have to put the
Mm.
oxygen mask on yourself first, even though there's a child next to you, and then you put on the child.
Mm.
Because at no point
Okay.
can I take care of you if I'm not taking care of myself.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to emphasize about this,
About
about the
self-love,
entire, no, the entire topic? Anything that you'd like to emphasize?
uh, so I think somebody asked, Vidhi, I think asked about forgiveness, how to learn to
Mm-hmm.
forgive someone. I
Mm-hmm.
think learning to forgive someone comes from us realizing we can't change people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the reason why we struggle with forgiveness is because we think we can change other people. I will be that miraculous
Mm-hmm.
person who can bring about change in somebody and make them a better person. But the thing is that you need to realize you can't. Um, they are who they
Mm-hmm.
are. I have to accept them for who they are and their actions are. And if their actions have hurt me, I have to move away from it because I have to preserve and like take care of myself first
Mm-hmm.
and allow them to be where they are. You know, even if
Okay.
they come and say sorry or not, it's not for me to decide.
Mm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, there is a question. So it reads, Ma'am, I'm third year MBBS student. I was in a relationship with a wonderful guy for 6 years. We broke up last year in August, but we're still in contact. We talk. This is a question though. I think she
Hmm.
wants you to elaborate on that.
So I'm struggling to see what the question is over here, but what I will tell you is that 6 is a
Mm-hmm.
really long time to be with someone, and I'm sure a relationship must have been quite deep and meaningful because also you'll have grown up together in a deeper sense.
Mm-mm.
My
Yes.
if I have to ask you a question that okay, you guys are in touch right now, is being in touch healthy for you? And that could be a yes or that could be a no. And if it's yes, then
Mm-hmm.
that's superb for you. You guys have learned to navigate around the whole concept of a breakup. If it's not, if you're still you're in a gray area where you guys still are trying to figure out each other's emotional connection or not, you need to figure
Mm-hmm.
out how much of self-harm it's causing you, how much of you not living your life as a third year
Mm-hmm.
MBBS student is taking place, you know, because being a student is it's fantastic. It's one of the great experiences in life.
Mm.
Don't let it take you. Don't let anything take that away from you.
Okay. So we'll just wait for more people to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Uh, Somebody asked a question about how do I stop overthinking about the fact that everyone hates you. You know, that question was somewhere there.
mm-hmm.
Uh, Here's the thing. My question to you is, how do you know everybody hates you? I mean, what evidence do you have that everyone hates you? That's such a universal statement that everyone hates you. I'm somebody in the everyone circle, and I don't hate you. I don't even know you, but I don't hate you. That's an assumption you've made.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm going with this is that we tend to assume a lot of negativity in our lives. We assume that people don't like us. We assume that people are judging us. We assume we are going to fail. So we don't do any of it. And what you need to realize, if I'm assuming things, if I don't have actual factual evidence, and if I'm going to make
Mm-hmm.
these universal statements about it, the only person getting hurt is me. And if I'm assuming something, you, the word ass, you, me, is that you're
Mm-hmm.
making yourself an ass. Pardon my language, but it's in the word assume. That if I'm going to sit and assume in it, you're making yourself an ass because there is no factual evidence that says everyone hates me. You know, you need to
Mm-hmm.
work on a little bit of rational thinking, fact finding as a tool for it.
Okay. So there's another question that says, how did I get rid of someone who's toxic?
Cut them off completely.
Okay.
The simplest answer is cut them off completely. There's this book called Gaslight. If you are dealing with a toxic relationship, I would recommend you read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And the funny part about that book is that the answer to every toxic relationship, if you're with a narcissist or somebody who's ghosting you or somebody is a gaslighter, the answer is you need to have that inner strength to cut off that relationship completely. There is no middle ground. If you're trying to approach a middle ground, if the person has these personality traits, the only person who's going to get hurt is you. So you need to first
Okay.
cut off, reset your boundaries. Most important.
Okay, that brings me to another question. So, how do you identify whether the relationship is toxic?
There'll be a lot of red flags in it. I think it comes from looking at how much the person listens to your emotional needs versus how much of their own emotional needs they hear. How they respect people around them. You know, one of the most definite signs is that most of us tend to go out on dates with whoever we are dating. See how they treat the wait staff. If they are kind to the staff, they're more likely to show good signs with it. Third
Okay.
is that see how much they leave you hanging. So very often people say, okay, I'll call you back in like at 10 o'clock, or I'll call you up in 15 minutes. And they don't call you back, or they're not there at 10 o'clock to call you up. How often do they do this? If they do this very often, you have to realize this person is showing traits of toxicity, they're showing traits of narcissism, but they're not valuing you and your emotional needs, you know. If this tends to be pattern. And very often they have very good reasons for it, you know, but it's largely not. Also, one way to
Okay.
recognize this is that initially in the relationship, the person will shower you with a lot of love. You will be the epicenter of the universe. Everything revolves around you. But then suddenly, after a couple of months, all of that suddenly disappears and you're treated like crap. So what actually this does, it gives you these love bombs. They send a lot of love your way where you feel like you're the queen of the world. And then suddenly that's taken all away and then you experience withdrawals for that love. So you start yearning for their affection. And if that has happened, that's a relationship you need to quickly bounce from, you know, leave, cut away.
Okay, so there's one more question. So, when we try to be good and people take advantage, how to continue to be good?
Why would you continue to be good with somebody who's taking advantage of you? You have to set boundaries for yourself, right? I think
Okay.
being good is saying, no, I think you're taking advantage of me and I'm not going to be okay with that. I think self-love is saying, no, that this is you taking advantage of me and I'm not okay with it. I know all of us want to be the good person and do the good thing, but being the good person, doing the good thing first starts by being the good person for me, not for society. Yeah.
Okay, so how to deal with one-sided love?
Why are you in that? If the person is not reciprocating it to you, why are you continuously going back to it? And my answer to this, I can love a person at a distance. I can love you, but I don't have to love your actions. I have to love myself more. And this is an example of self-love again, where I know I feel very strongly for the other person, and I feel this chemistry with them, so as to say, but they don't seem to reciprocate it. So this is me saying, okay, I'm going to step away from it because I need to take care of myself. I need to love myself. So I can love you, but I don't have to be with you to love you, you know. And you have to continue engaging us with other activities, try to make effort to go out and date other people, see how things are.
Okay, there's one more question that says, let's say if someone else likes you and you don't like them, so how do you say no to that, you know, without breaking their heart or something like that?
Okay, that's a very tricky one because I know it's the sensitivity of the issue, and you know you have to look at the right time. And the person does like you have to say, you know, I thank you for expressing my feelings and your feelings, and I hear what you're saying, but right now I don't feel that way about you. You have to be honest with that person because if you're going to not be honest with that person about your feelings, you're actually leading that person on, thus suggesting you're going to do more hurt and damage to that person's emotions than otherwise. So acknowledge their feelings and say, be honest.
Okay, so there's another one that says, do paranoid people justify their paranoia by guilt? Do they just place a mental barrier by doing so?
Do paranoid people justify their paranoia with guilt? And what was the last sentence you said?
Do they place a mental barrier by doing so?
No. Paranoid people don't justify their paranoia with guilt. That's not a telltale signs. Maybe in this particular situation with this person, maybe they're doing it. But paranoia is not that. Paranoia is a lot of suspicion, a lot of doubts, a lot of fear. But if you're saying if this person is paranoid about you and then they try to impose like guilt on you in the relationship, like blackmail you, make you feel guilty for your actions because of their suspiciousness, this again is a justification that this relationship is unhealthy because clearly that person can't trust you. And if they and trust is the foundation of a relationship. If there is no trust, what relationship is happening over there? Yeah.
Okay. So in a completely, just a minute, I'll just find it. So in a complete negative environment, how do you motivate yourself to be positive all the time?
In a completely negative environment, you have to start appreciating the smaller details in life. One of my favorite examples is that you need to go out there and create something good just for yourself. It could be a cup of tea. You go make that cup of tea exactly the way you want it and then enjoy it. You start with the smaller, finer details of life, and maybe right now it's external, maybe right now it's materialistic things. It's okay. Start with it first. As long as you have control over those small little things, you acknowledge them and show gratitude towards them.
Okay. So
See, in a completely negative environment does not exist. And why I'm going to say this is because I have the power to bring about some changes in my environment. I'm not completely helpless. Maybe the environment may have more control over me than currently do, but something as simple as I study for 1 hour today, I'm in control of that. I did it. That could be my one good thing and my one positive thing in my environment. Or I had a very balanced meal today. That's one thing I was in control of. That could be a positive thing in my environment. Start identifying the small things. And that's why daily gratitude and that rose thorn bud technique is very important, because we don't believe negativity is the only thing in our life that clouds us. There are positive things. I just have to go out there and make extra effort to find it.
Okay, so how do you know when it is time to let go? I think it's referring to a person, like when do you let go of a person?
I think you just know. If I have to be as cryptic as that, I think you can feel it in your gut. And the gut actually is the perfect balance of your emotional intelligence and your multiple intelligence. Let's just say it's a perfect balance of that. So the fact that you're asking this question probably is an indicator that maybe you need to sit down and talk to whoever that person is, that where is this relationship going and what does not feel right about that relationship. Yeah, if I have to say that. There is no real sign at that.
There's one more question that says how to look after your mental health when you're not keeping well for a long time, or you're suffering from a serious health issues and that gets you into depression again and again.
Okay. So here's the thing. The three basic pillars of good mental health are eat, sleep, exercise. 8 hours of continuous sleep, 3 balanced meals, and at least 20 minutes of some form of physical exercise. You have to engage in this every day. I know your physical health may be sometimes difficult for you to go out there and do some kind of activity, but try the best you can to do it. Okay, that's the basics. Now, even after this persists, you need to probably start engaging in some form of reflective, positive self-talk. By that, I mean some daily journaling. So something you could do is 15 minutes of continuous journaling. It's a great journaling technique. What you need to do is set a timer on your phone or your clock for 15 minutes and just keep writing for 15 minutes continuously. Now, I'm pretty sure somebody must be thinking that how can I write for 15 minutes continuously? It seems like such a long task. I don't have that many thoughts. Now, for example, if I am writing something and I say the leaf is green and I have no other thought coming to mind, keep writing the word green, 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 because that's the last word of the sentence until unless another thought comes in or till the 15 minutes gets over, buzzes, okay? The second really effective way. And third and most important thing is reach out to a mental health professional. They are accessible. It's not so stigmatized anymore. They are humans, and they can empathize with what you're going through, and they'll probably be able to cater to your need better. So reach out to a mental health professional is my third thing for this.
Okay. So my last question for you is how to identify and deal with control freaks.
How to identify and deal with control freaks. So a control freak is somebody who's constantly going to be there telling you how to do things and giving no room or scope for error. And to deal with a control freak is setting boundaries. Is about being assertive and saying, no, this is what I am going to do and this is what I'm comfortable doing and I cannot do more than this. I think one of the most powerful words in life is the word no. And once you start being comfortable with saying the word no and being assertive through that and setting your boundaries with that, there is so much of liberation that lies ahead for you. So, no. Use that word. That's the best way to deal with a control freak.
Okay. So it was very informative, and you gave us a lot of new perspective on heartbreaks. And guys, you can DM us, and if anything else that you would like to add, you can send us a feedback. And thank you so much, ma'am. It was a very, very nice session.
I'm glad you
Okay,
liked
ma'am.
it. Most welcome. Also, just want to add in over here, given what has happened
Mm-hmm.
with Sushant Singh Rajput's passing away today, what the
Mm-hmm.
Thought Company has done is that every day from Monday to Friday, from 12 to
Mm-hmm.
1, we are receiving pro bono support calls for 15 minutes. So, just in case anybody from
Mm-hmm.
your team needs to reach out to us, they're more than welcome to at this point in time for the coming
Okay,
weeks.
ma'am. Sure. Okay, ma'am. Sure, that is a very great initiative from your side, and thanks again. It was a very, it was an amazing session. I loved it a lot. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
I'm
ma'am.
glad so.
Take care.
All right. Have a good
Bye,
evening
ma'am.
and thank you for participating, guys. Bye.
Bye.